So we have a lot of time to kill, not us, but they on the show, between this when they're getting the cage set up for Race Flair. So we get credits because, hey, why not? We'll get some credits in there. We get Tony Schiavone with Jimmy Valiant with Charlie Brown, and he dedicates the win to the people and to Jimmy Valiant, which was, great, obviously. Roddy Piper comes in, cuts a damn good promo, and promises to take Valentine's U.S. title next. Piper just being extraordinary in this one. We get Steamboat and Youngblood celebrating their win. Youngblood so bad on the microphone. We get Dusty with some women saying kind of more of the same. But, it was kind of odd to see Dusty with all these, almost like what Ric Flair would be known for with all the women. Yep. And then all of that. And then we now get the national anthem before the main event. So any comments on all those kind of rapid fire promos and also having the national anthem before the main event instead of before the show?
Well, risky maneuver to have a cage match that has to be assembled on the very first pay-per-view live event. I mean, this was probably a lesson learned, I'm sure. But as far as the national anthem, I'm looking forward to your research and history on James Tiny Weeks, because I have no clue, and I'm looking for information on this country music superstar.
Yeah, I think using the term superstar very, very loosely here. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I've never known or heard of. But wow. Yeah. We'll go with enhancement
talent of country music.
Exactly right.
Is that what we've discovered here?
I think it'll be the first installment of that. But so we get the world title match, and I don't know how you want to tackle this. Do we just get the shit out of the way first? So everything positive about this match, and it's Harley Race and Ric Flair. You probably read so many articles about the match, and it's great and stuff like that. But the guest referee is former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a Hall of Fame wrestler, Gene Kiniski. And he is absolutely the worst referee, even for a guest referee, by anybody in a ring that is not a wrestler. He is the worst, maybe with wrestlers as well, just the worst thing ever. And I say that because I can't stop watching what he's doing the entire match. This World Heavyweight title match is I'm going to go on record, is ruined by Gene Kiniski, and there's just so much that he does that's wrong. And I'm not talking about the botch finish that we'll get to or the clunky finish. I'm talking about he's getting involved in every move, to the point where when they're hitting suplexes, when they're up vertically in the air, he is like grabbing his hand to make sure the wrestler doesn't grab the tight to suplex him, which we know they do. And it almost looks like he's suplexing him with them, like helping him out. Everything about this is just so bad. It is botchamania, wrestle crap, and everything rolled into one. Gene Kiniski, you ruined this match. The end.
I think you've started another running thing here, because I think we're going to challenge our listeners and followers to find a worse referee performance. I think there's got to be some out there, at least close. So we're going to see if anybody can find anything better, or worse, I should say, than this performance. I'm also curious if WrestleCrap's actually ever covered this, because some of this is just so crazy. I remember when we first talked about doing this show, I kind of remembered in my head, I'm thinking, I remember there being the finish and something just wasn't right to me. It didn't feel, something was just, could have been better. I didn't remember all of this, but there is so much more than the finish. And I think by the time I got to the finish, I was like, the finish wasn't that bad, but the other stuff, oh my God. Yeah. What the hell? This totally changed my perspective on the match.
The finish was the least of the transgressions of Gene Kiniski here. And I don't know if it's like, hey, he's from that mentality of, I'm a former NWA World Champion too. I'm going to make sure I'm noticed in this as well, even though obviously he's long gone from his days on top and being an active wrestler. But still, it's like, what the hell, man? Like he was physically interjecting himself on everything in the match. Like I know Harley Race probably has a lot of respect for Gene Kiniski and stuff, and he didn't want to murder the old man. But at some point, I was like thinking like this could get pretty bad. So there's just a lot of stuff. So we'll table that. So everything, all of our listeners know that Gene Kiniski ruins this. But we'll talk about the match as if he doesn't exist. The entrance for Flair is epic. It's one of my favorite Flair entrances. It is just, when we talk about it feeling like it is not a big arena show, there's not 16,000 people there. It's kind of more of that regional feel, the bloody mat and everything. Throw that out the window when Flair comes out, because just that visual, and it is dark and everything, but it just Flair, it's amazing. I mean, there's nobody like him from an entrance standpoint, especially in that era.
Yeah, it was iconic, and those highlights were used for years to come. I think they still pop up now and then when a Flair video comes on WWE or something like that, and really set the tone for. I mean, it's been talked about how he spent money on the robes and everything, and always changing the tights colors, keeping it fresh. I mean, it was just such a big part of his presentation back then and why he had the longevity.
And then conversely, the champ comes out, to no music, just sitting there slowly kind of plodding to the ring, but like just looking at the crowd, just like, the booze raining down. I'm just building up the hatred to this just big kind of apex. It was such a great difference. Almost like, and when we talk about Starrcade 87 and you look at Garvin and Flair, where, Garvin's the face and kind of the tougher guy, the kind of more blue collar, just badass, and Flair's like here it's different because the face is the one that's the more flashier one, but like Race makes it work so well, and it's easy to hate him, and I think the fact that there was just no music and it was just him walking out was great.
This might be the only time that I support no music, because as you know, I'm all about music and entrances and all that, but Harley Race may be one of the few guys that actually pulls off just a spotlight. All you need, he's the champion, he walks out, looks at the crowd, getting the reaction. I can't think of a song that would have worked for him. Really, I mean, there's just nothing that would have fit. He does it all. It's just all him, and nothing else is needed.
Yeah, I mean, he's enhanced by no music, and like if you asked him like what music, I don't want music. So it was. I thought that was great. And the entrances here were, and once again, it was great because freaking referee didn't have to ruin everything, but was wonderful. The match itself, Flair controls a lot of the early on, and the crowd's digging it. And then Race eventually counters and rams him into the cage. And I love the blood. There's a lot of blood in this match. There's been a lot of blood on the show. This is a bloody show, but this one, the blood actually hits the camera. And once again, just adding to the brutality. And I know that wasn't planned probably, but that was awesome. And it just shows that, hey, no, we're kicking this up to 11 because this is a cage match with Harley Race and Ric Flair, and the blood is everywhere. Flair is busted open so bad, and it looks great.
Yeah. It's like I said, cage matches back then were guaranteed blood pretty much. And I mean, in later years when there wasn't blood, it was like, what is going on here? This isn't a cage match. What the hell is this? This set the tone for brutality and what a world title in a cage looked like.
Yeah, and another funny moment came when Race reverses the figure four. And Gordon Solie says he's only ever seen this happen once ever in wrestling. Wow. So, I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, I love you, Solie. And if that is true, that is sad. But I think this was maybe a little bit of a stretch to hype up how great of a reversal it was and how important that was. I think you could say like it's hard to reverse it, but to claim that's the only what's only ever been done one other time in wrestling history, I don't know. Maybe NWA fans in 1983 believed that, but that seemed a little silly to me.
I think Gordon had to work overtime a little bit here because there was a few times he had to cover different things that were happening with the aftermesh and referee and making sense of stuff. Gordon really had to do more than just commentate. He really had to put some more reasoning behind what we were seeing on the screen, I think. Yeah,
and Bob Caudle was probably taking a nap. It was probably past his bedtime at this point. So anything to add before we get to the finish itself? In the match. I mean, and I guess we could talk about this after we finish off the match, but this is, I think, highly regarded, right? Like, I mean, history judges this match very kindly, and it's, PWI Match of the Year that year and the Wrestling Observer Match of the Year, all that good stuff. And, great storyline leading into it and great match. But the match itself, and I'm going to use the term basic, and I don't want to devalue the match because it's a brutal, bloody cage match, but it wasn't like they were pushing the envelope on any sort of unique, they probably had this match 75 times, just maybe not as bloody that month. Who knows? So there wasn't anything here that really stood out to me outside of the brutality, and the story around it was great leading up to the match. And the visuals were wonderful. The personalities were great, but the match itself, when you break it down, to me, it was okay.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when you told me that. It reminded me that this was match of the year because I just didn't think that, many places regard this as an actual match of the year. I think it's looked back upon as more Ric Flair's arrival as being a top star in the business. I don't know if anybody really says that's my favorite match ever, but I think they look at the event more and say that's when he was ready, because Flair himself has said during his first title run he wasn't ready to be the champion, traveling champion, take on all that responsibility and whatnot and be that type of star, but he was ready at this point. So I think this was the turning point, the passing of the torch type of thing, and I think that's what it's more looked back on for. As far as the match goes, I mean, it's going to be more referee related stuff, even though you said we had to ignore it. But I mean, a lot of the problem here, I think, was that the rules kind of seemed to change as they went along. As far as Kiniski goes, he seemed to just be like enforcing things and then not enforcing things, and of course enforcing things that should never even been enforced in the first place. But I mean, I think at first he's being aggressive with both guys as far as breaking holds and whatnot, and that part I didn't mind. I thought, okay, he's a enforcer type referee. Harley Race has already had bounties put out. This has got to be in a cage, biggest match ever, quote unquote type of thing. So didn't mind that. But I think like there's a point when Flair rams Race into the cage and Kiniski just goes nuts and he's like pushing Flair like he's pissed off. And this is a part I was talking about with Gordon when he had to step in, like, oh, Kiniski's a purist and, you know, he's trying to enforce the pure wrestling. It's like, this is a cage match that's allowed to ram guys in the cage, but he's pushing Flair, who's the good guy here, and pissed off. But then it had to have been less than 1 minute later, Race rams Flair into the cage and there's no reaction from Kiniski. So it's like, wait a minute, or you don't want Flair to ram Race into the cage, but the other way is okay? Are you turning here? Or what is that about? It's just like, okay. And then there's another point where Kiniski, I believe it was on Race, one or the other, but one guy was down and he's making the other guy wait while he counts like a boxing match. He starts counting him out like for 10 count. It's like, what is that? Where did that rule come from? It's just, there's so much changing as we go. And as you said too, the suplex is like, you can't pull tights on a suplex. Like it just got overboard as far as you can't pull tights on a pin, but when has that ever been enforced on a suplex? So the rules were all over the place. They were crazy. They just weren't being followed. I think that's where it got away with the whole refereeing thing. So really stood out. Maybe I just haven't really watched this match as close as I do for this show because we're really trying to watch every little detail. And before, maybe I just kind of had it on in the background or just casually watched, but it definitely stood out a lot more this time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's no logic or rationale to explain why Kiniski refereed how he did. And it was just bad. So he is involved in the finish. And like I said, I don't think it was overall like a major botch as much as it was just, I don't think it came across as what they wanted it to. And so Race accidentally headbutts Kiniski out of a headlock, and Kiniski is knocked down, and Flair basically scurries up and does a high cross body from the top to Race. And what they were going for was that Race would just topple over the knelt down Kiniski. He was on all fours, and that would propel Flair to give the easy pin or the pin there. And they don't really execute that. He kind of more just like Kiniski's kind of on the ground and that kind of wallowing around, and he kind of like maybe Race trips over his leg. I don't know. It just looks really kind of like Kiniski looked like an idiot. And Flair wins with the cross body and wins the title. And to your point, it's kind of his, even though it's his second reign, it's he comes out as this is probably the one that really is the springboard into his Ric Flair that we all know and love.
Yeah, the finish, I couldn't tell if they were trying to do the spot where it's like a headlock and then shoots him off and runs into the ref, or if it was Harley Race trying to knock the referee down intentionally so he could cheat. It was somewhere lost in between there, and I couldn't tell which one it was, so it just got confusing at that point. I just remembered, I guess for some reason, the count just seemed like the fans saw the high cross body and a faster pin would have been more exciting. But I see where they were just kind of going with it. It just seemed kind of lackluster, I guess. But back then, all Flair's matches, title changes especially, had either backslides or a ton of small packages, always the fast moves, never a finishing move or anything like that. So it kind of played into that a little bit. But nonetheless, yeah, it's hard to tell what they were going for here. But it got to the main objective, which was to make Flair the next big main event star.
So we get after the terrible finish and Flair wins, all the baby faces come in to celebrate. We get the emotional speech from Ric Flair. His wife at the time comes in, and Mosca carries him on his shoulders. And, at the end of this grueling, bloody 23 minutes and 46 seconds, yeah, I mean, it's the big hurrah, the big celebration that everybody wanted to see. And you have 16,000 people going crazy, and Flair cuts a very babyface promo. I mean, oh my gosh. And yeah, so that's how you would think the show would end. But then, you must not have been watching the same show we did, because you get another 17 backstage interviews. But any lasting thoughts on the actual match itself?
It's very historical. Like I said, it's a moment in time, and kind of the end of Harley Race's run as the main guy in the NWA and the beginning of Flair's. It's hard to look back. I mean, it seemed like Flair was the top heel just right after this, and somewhat before this too. So it was hard to have this one night of him being such a nice guy, because dirtiest player in the game was running roughshod not long after this. But on this night, he was the most popular guy in the building by far, and it's a historical moment for sure when you look back at Ric Flair's run, when it all started, really started with him as a top guy.
Agreed. So after this, like I said, because, we don't want to end on that high note. We want to go back to the locker room and mellow it out. It's after your workout, you're doing kind of a cool down lap here with Tony in the locker room with Steamboat, saying more of the same. And then we get Flair. He's back there, and Dusty comes in and makes the official challenge. Says, hey, congratulations, great win, but I got you next. So I get having that, but it just seems so weird that that is done in the locker room after the match. Then we get, I think, the best interview of the night when Barbara Clary's back with Harley Race, and she just the camera goes to her. She has the mic, and she just goes, "I'm sorry," and I thought that was funny. I thought it was great. Like and Harley was like, "Hey, you were the better man today," or whatever, but he'll be back. And we get more locker rooms after that, locker room interviews. What the fuck, man? And then we get Flair and the tag champs. And then Flair says Jimmy Valiant instead of Charlie Brown, which I thought that was great. It's like, come on, Rick. I mean, it was downtown Charlie Brown, right? So Flair spoils that angle right there. So at the end of the day, like, just a weird ending to the show after like what you would think is the logical ending and the big celebration in the ring. But, that was kind of par for the course for the Starrcade 83.
I think this it's the sports vibe, really. You have to equate it to the World Series team winning the World Series. Then you have the presentation of the trophy, and then you go back in the locker room and you see the champagne. I think it's just, this is how a sport's presented, and that's all they knew back then. There was no entertainment. This was not a movie. This was a sports show. That's why they went with it this way. And WWE probably really were the ones that changed the way things worked, because they had the production and the entertainment and didn't want to come out and make a sporting event. They came out and said sports entertainment. So I think that's why we got all this ending stuff, because the champagne celebration at the end was something we saw, many different times over the years. And it was just part of the tradition, I think.
Yeah, that's a great call. That's a great call putting about the sports based programming approach. To me, it was less like there were interviews. It was just the specific interviews they did. It's like if they went back and it was Flair and you had the Dusty challenge, and then you even had the Harley Race stuff, and then kind of the Flair, but they had to fill it in with all these kind of more, like, how many times did we see Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood in here? It's like, I get you won the titles. We already told us. You've already said that stuff. Like, I just felt like the quantity wasn't the right amount, and there was just a lot of repeat stuff. But who knows?
Dusty's challenge just seemed off, because he wasn't saying like, next week's show or at next month. It was like legitimately next year. Can I challenge you next year at Starrcade? They didn't have monthly pay-per-views. They didn't have any pay-per-views. They had one per year. So it's just interesting that it was such a focal point, that being, what we've seen over the, recent years, you would think they're plugging the next show. When is it? They're trying to get buys for the next one, or, people to go watch it at closed circuit, whatever it may be. But maybe they had a more recent match than the next year, but it just seems like they're really setting up the next year's Starrcade. Maybe they thought they were. They thought like every year they were going to build, that one show throughout the entire year, and this was the start of it. But interesting placement nonetheless.